Do want to encourage everyone to check out the events listing in Discord. Next Friday, the 8th, is the next segment on the V10 cornerstones that we've been talking about, which is the persistence Q&A. And it will feature Luis and Irving answering questions about data storage and persistence issues or persistence features within the V10 spec. So highly encourage everyone to engage with that. Also, if you're not there already, please make sure you check out the threads in the Node Runners channel. There are a couple of different threads that are active in there in regards to documentation. Currently, the focus is um, staking Pocket to your node and connecting your node to the relay chains. And participating in that documentation creation does advance you in your quest for a DAO vote. There's an achievement for that. So if you're working on getting a DAO vote, which every one of you should, uh, that's a way to get one of the things on your whitelist done. So that being said, those are the key things that we have running right now. And there aren't any other advance announcements, I don't think. Okay. So we'll
Okay.
dive. Go ahead, Shane. You were unmuted accidentally. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and dive into QA. Who's got a question this week?
I have a question. I think it's probably directed to. I noticed some of the nodes, like Ben, your nodes seem to use non-standard SSL ports. Like I see 7,000. Is there any reason for that you could share or benefit?
And not a question I've heard before. Ben Van, you want to comment on that?
Sorry, I was in the other room. What was the question?
Steve?
I noticed that some of your nodes are using like non-standard SSL ports, like 7,000 range ports. And I was just curious, is that like for organization, or is there some benefit to doing that, or just curious, really?
There's no benefit to it in terms of like productivity. It's a management thing I'm using. I work in groups of 25. And I always have. I found that it's easier for me to just use the last two digits of my naming convention and use that as the port, right? So I can group nodes easier. But no, there's no actual productivity increase to it. You can point them all at 443, which is what I always used to do. It's just a management issue on my end.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was just curious. I noticed that and just was wondering why. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only other thing, I mean, from a security perspective, I know a number of sysadmins who prefer to completely disable all standard ports and, remap some of those service functions to non-standard ports just for the purpose of reducing like bot activity, sniffing around those ports and all the rest of that. So, I mean, there may be some additional server config benefit if you're managing your own bare metal. And I know, Steve, you're doing a lot of bare metal stuff, so I mean that might be something to consider.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Beautiful. Next question. While we're waiting for additional questions come up, again, do hit the Q or the events listing in Discord and make sure that you are RSVP'd to the next 3 calls regarding the V1 Cornerstone spec. Everyone who is a node runner should be on top of what's happening with V1 and be a part of that conversation. It's going to be probably a year-long process or so in developing that and getting it out. The team has committed to making it a very community-friendly approach with lots of input along the way. But if you don't know the basics of it, then you're not going to be able to effectively participate in the conversation. So make sure you're in there. Who has another question?
I have one. I'm not sure if it's a good forum for it or not, or whether even anyone will be willing to share this type of information. But
Sure.
with obviously, when you're talking about larger scale implementations of Pocket Node hosting, you know, tens, 20, hundreds, or however many pocket nodes, there's got to be some kind of golden ratio in terms of the number of pocket nodes to the underlying RPC infrastructure, which you're kind of supporting as well. So let's say you're executing or running relays for Harmony. How many Harmony nodes of a given specification are required to satisfy the average load that we see on a daily basis to 10 pocket nodes, for example. I'm not sure if there's any kind of analytics out there or recommendations in terms of that kind of ratioing of underlying RPC infrastructure to pocket node infrastructure.
Yeah, I expect a couple of folks will have some input on this. One of the things that we hear frequently is, what is the actual capacity of the network? And while hard numbers haven't been published, I expect that some of the core engineers, especially protocol team and such, have run internal testing and have some good sense of this. One of the things that we've been using sort of casually to calculate is what are some of the max amounts of rewards that we've seen daily on a node, which gives you some sense of how many relays that node was capable of processing. And so if you look at the fact that nodes have clocked in at 12 or 1200 1400 pocket in a day, and even in some cases larger than that, and then calculate relays from that across the total node count in the entire network, the numbers get pretty big pretty quickly. But then specifically when asking in regards to individual chains, I think that starts to get a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of analytics that would have to be done there to get a real sense for how many nodes are actually supporting each of those chains in the network. And that's one of the things with OEC coming up, officially whitelisted today, actually, per Rich's announcement. How many nodes have added OEC right now? The ability to support OEC traffic is going to be an important part of the equation of onboarding that. We saw Algorand got whitelisted in October, but I've yet to see any actual traffic come through there, and I'd supporting Algorand from a state perspective. Other thoughts on that, or other insights from other node runners?
I have a thought on it. It seems to me that if the question is how many pocket nodes to say one Harmony node makes sense, the question seems like how often do you have multiple pocket nodes of your nodes that are processing a transaction for Harmony around the same time? And maybe other people have an answer to that, but it seems like you could just keep going up until you get to the point where your pocket nodes would be in contention for the Harmony node. So it seems like, and this is theoretical thinking, but it seems like a lot, like where it's not 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. It seems like it would be a lot, but I don't have enough to say for sure if there's an upper limit there.
Oh, I think I came at that from the wrong angle, and thanks for that clarifying statement. If we're talking about specifically in individual setups, it really does heavily depend on the traffic and how many nodes you're getting in session on a regular basis. But I think we've started to see some fall off or some conflict at, over 12, 13 nodes, maybe. Larger node runners who have highly optimized setups might be able to squeeze more out of that, but in our little bare metal farm, that's where we started to see a little bit of fall off.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, these are a good idea of numbers. I mean, it brings into question like a further kind of quandary, I think, in terms of like optimizing the decentralized underlying decentralization of the RPC infrastructure itself, right? Like, what's the optimal thing for the network itself in terms of how many Harmony nodes, right? Because if you can squeeze more out of a single node to the point where you've got 100 pocket nodes relaying to a single Harmony node, is that better from a decentralization perspective for the pocket network than having a lower ratio? And the fact that none of that kind of underlying analysis or kind of metric information about the ratio of pocket nodes to underlying RPC instances is available makes it very difficult to know how decentralized the underlying kind of RPC infrastructure is.
I mean, I think you'll find broad agreement on that front, and a couple of the pocket engineers have checked into conversations that we've had, either here or in the Poctopus Den on Telegram, talking about some of the more advanced analytics that they have internally, and have softly committed to at some point in time releasing some of that data in a human friendly form. So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, one of the things that we see is a breakdown of, or one of the things that they see that we frequently don't, is a breakdown of which dApps specifically within a dApp stake are using that. For example, Harmony chain is supported, right? But under that Harmony chain, you've got, a significant number of individual dApps that have been organically staked against the network. And it's, unless you have access to that internal usage data, it's kind of hard to see and predict which dApps are potentially going to peak, causing more traffic. When it comes to like forecasting and such, that more detailed data would definitely be helpful. So reminder again to those pocket engineers who have participated in those conversations in the past, we would love to see more of that data from a dashboard perspective.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks for the info.
You got it.
Yeah, I'd also be curious along those same lines, like when I was first messing around with this, just for simplicity, like I set up a node that was relaying to an Alchemy node because I messed around with Alchemy before. And I wondered if anybody else is doing that, like using another node hosting provider rather than setting up the relay chain node yourself. That was one, I guess, question. And the other thought question that I had that I just like to put out there for everybody is, like, it seems like if there was a way to coordinate just within the Pocket node runners, a way to share your underlying chain nodes to X number of people, that could be advantageous for everybody. Because, like, I know for like my Harmony node, for example, could stand more traffic from other nodes, which I'll add more of my own nodes, but possibly nodes from other node runners as well. Has anybody else thought of either of those things? Sorry to lump two questions into one.
Hey, I love it when these questions sort of evolve organically, because I think it takes us all through, there's two sides of these questions, right? We've got the troubleshooting sides where something's not working correctly. But I think more importantly in some of these calls is the architectural and planning side, and chewing on some of these topics is part of that equation. I've actually thought quite a bit about, your collaboration among node runners when it comes to distribution of resources and things along that line. And a lot of that thought process was inspired by Ben Van, who, early on set up the Cool Kids peering tower and has, significantly contributed to the peering architecture of the network at large. And by, having the Cool Kids peering tower, it was a way for other smaller node runners to, have a larger peer that they could connect to, which helps with, general traffic routing and that sort of thing. The biggest thing that I think, because I've thought really hard about, is it possible to allow, a significant number of node runners to collaborate on hosting some of these more storage intensive chains, right? Especially the archival chains. Some of them are just huge. And we were talking about the poly RPCs the other day. And Pierre was talking about the size of what it takes to actually host those. The biggest concern, I think, on that front is you start getting into issues with relative latency, right? If you're not in the same data center or on the same rack or even in the same city in some cases, are you even going to get those relays at all if your, relative latency to the node is up over, say, 100 milliseconds or so. That was a big hard barrier for us that we had to tune in extremely well to be able to start getting really, predictable performance out of our nodes. And I think it's difficult to solve that particular problem. I'd be very interested in hearing some insight from, some of the more senior network admin gurus on how some of that might be accomplished.
I think that's where the opportunity is like if you've got nodes in different regions and say for like an archival relay node, for it to work well, you're going to not just need an archival chain node in one region, you're going to need it in each one of the regions that you've got pocket nodes. And so like it's the resources times X regions. But if there was a way to share, for example, like I could have an archival node set up in a region that my nodes are using, but I've only got a few nodes in that region. So I could whitelist X number of IP addresses in that same region that were other node runners that could use that same, and they could return the favor for their archival node in another region. So I wouldn't have the costs of these in every region that I want to run my pocket nodes in. So I was thinking of it as actually a way of addressing that challenge that you were bringing up specifically.
Well, one of the things that I've seen from a couple of the node runners and sort of analyzing everybody's architecture as much as I can from an outside perspective is some really creative uses of virtualization layers. And maybe that's one of those places where remote storage could make use of virtualization layers to reduce total or reduce relative latency to an answering node, which may not itself be the actual core storage of data, but which may act as an intermediary to keep those QoS scores high. And that's certainly something that's interesting. The way that the altruist backup network is set up right now, I think also represents a possible model for doing something similar with distributed storage of some of these bigger archival chains, where a DAO proposal might be put up to say, hey, let's fund a series of storage devices in various places around the country, running a virtualization layer over the top of it that allows for node runners to connect to that as a backend. I imagine that, Pocket might be disinclined as a DAO to, support long-term storage costs, but maybe as part of an opportunity to, kickstart a project like that, there may be some meat there. I'd be open to a conversation about it.
Yeah, it's a particularly interesting conversation, right? Because the obviously decentralization in and of itself brings about or makes it more difficult to achieve some of the efficiencies which can be seen in a centralized architecture, or at least an architecture which has centralized kind of design. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting opportunity, right? If you can kind of design a global architecture for all of the underlying RPC infrastructure, which both meets the needs of like being decentralized enough, but is as efficient as possible in terms of cost base for the the upper tier layer of the pocket nodes to use and be a part of. I mean, that's certainly an interesting proposition, I think.
Absolutely. And there's a there's two sides of decentralization, right? There's the philosophy and ethos of decentralization, and then there's the actual architecture approach to decentralization. And a lot of folks who are heavy into the philosophy and ethos of decentralization will, sort of pick at Pocket network architecture and be like, well, you guys are using AWS, you're using DigitalOcean, you're using some of these big cloud providers. How is that decentralized? But from a functional perspective, which I think is more important when we're talking about infrastructure, decentralization is the guarantee that the service doesn't go down, period. And so, looking at the idea would be to have Pocket operating on every single provider out there, cloud, bare metal, hosted bare metal, local bare metal, you name it. I think all of that works towards improving decentralization as a whole. But then from a network optimization perspective, we've got to apply, in as much as possible, some of those high level, network sysadmin skills that are being used every day in providers like AWS and DigitalOcean to reduce latency, to improve quality of service, and finding that happy medium between the two is I think both the target and the challenge.
Yeah, totally agree.
The other piece of it, I think, that is relevant, and I know the DAO is talking about doing some things to like offset carbon, the carbon footprint for all of this. And sharing resources is definitely for anybody that cares about that piece. I do. It is a better way to go.
Yeah, agreed completely. I mean, it's there are some folks who, when participating in collaborative networks, are purely competitive, right? And that's part of the game. Some people are just going to have a zero sum game approach, but I think one of the things that's really stood out about the Pocket community at large is there is a significant amount of collaboration and data sharing that occurs among the folks who operate within this community. I mean, folks like Ben Van have come on and given long talks on architecture and some of the things that they do to optimize in the networks that they build out. And you just don't see that amount of data sharing in some other projects that are out there. I certainly won't point any fingers. But given that, I think that's something that we can really latch onto and continue to help push forward by looking at how we can collaborate on some of these things. Open source tooling that's come out of this community has already been strong as hell and has pushed Pocket far forward from where it was originally. Working to provide other options that allow for significant collaboration among disparate node runners is, that would be a priority for me. Thought I heard somebody starting to talk. Okay. Well, it's, long and short of it is, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, guys. I saw your tweet recently. I believe it was your tweet where you talked about how there was a map which showed sort of where like Latin America and some parts in Africa, let's say, where there was no node service sort of being provided. What would it require to? I guess what's required to change that? Would it just be like boots on the ground and also providers, like you said, like AWS, but sort of located in those areas in order to get those nodes up and running and to service those areas?
I mean, essentially, yes. So one of the things that's interesting is you look at the dark spots or the light spots on the map, actually, given how Coder styled it. But places where there's not significant penetration of like node runner coverage and such, and it's I think there are some challenges sometimes in working with emerging economies where you don't have the ease of well-established, high-performing data centers readily available to host hardware, cloud instances, or things along that line. But in doing the ROI calculations, one of the things to keep in mind is that in a lot of these emerging economies, the vast majority of computing is mobile computing. And so people who are servicing mobile computing interests like tend to capture significant amounts of market share fairly quickly. Latin America and the west coast of Africa are both great examples of that, where there are a few major providers who have achieved large market share in a short amount of time because they're servicing a need that's there that a lot of folks just aren't willing to dive into, more or less. So, there is a little more work involved. You can't just find 37 bare metal providers down there, especially when you move away from larger metropolitan areas. But you can get a lion's share of the actual relays being serviced in those areas by being the one who takes on that risk and that cost to do so. And I think boots on the ground is definitely part of the equation. If you can hit some of the major cities, anywhere from, really any of the major metropolitan areas, is a great place to start getting some penetration. But then going out into mid-sized cities and such where you see mobile computing as a ratio of total computing shoot up into the like high 80s, low 90s. I think there's some real opportunities there. It's the same way with serving some of the lesser used chains. you see that the top 5 performing chains by relays are on roughly 100% of the nodes in the network. But there are some big opportunities with some of the smaller chains to capture a significant number of those daily relays just because there aren't anywhere near as many nodes servicing those chains. That kind of ROI, I think, is really forward thinking and allows for a little bit of clever optimization above the network average and daily rewards.
Yeah, and I'll add on to what Jinx is saying. This is very forward looking, uh, because there is a natural limitation right now, as in the portal. Because I know I've done some research into deploying in like regions like India, and India, just where it sits, is too far away from portal deployments to really be worth anything. So even though there could be tons of traffic coming out of India, having your nodes in India until we have a portal there, it would be much better to actually deploy in a region that's closer to a portal. Now with V1 coming out, that's exactly where, once we have true global QoS, and it's not reliant on the portal as we are with V0, that will change the game, and that will be really interesting because you could have people that are deploying in these smaller regions, and really maximize their uh, uh, their access to relays in that particular region. Because also with some of these developing countries, they might have kind of good infrastructure within themselves, or at least decent infrastructure within themselves. But once you go out, try to go out of the country to try to get to one of the major pipelines, to then get routed to a portal or something like that, it can get really, that's where you can lose some speed, which at least right now with V0 is very important, to not have to have very quick speed to a portal. So yeah, so at least for right now, until we have portals in certain areas, um, yeah, there is going to be a natural limitation. But the good thing is uh, at least right now, the portal has been deployed to a lot of regions that are still underserved in terms of the amount of nodes that are there. Um, but then also that correlates to traffic as well, because more nodes are going to aggregate to where there's more traffic, because there's going to be more relays out of that portal to capture. So it'll ultimately be a kind of more of a free market balancing act of people going to where they're, where they think is going to be the most profitable for them. But yeah, just keep that in mind, at least for V0. Um, you know, at least right now there is the limitation of the portal until we get to V1.
Follow-up question to that came in on Discord, which was what's involved with setting up a portal? Is that something that, forward-looking node runners could assist with?
Not right now, and that's because portals aren't part of the blockchain itself. There's no like reward mechanism that goes to portals. Um, and so that's what V1 is addressing. V1 is addressing this ability to have QoS kind of globally. But at least for right now, we would have to completely change the consensus mechanism to then make portals an actual node to do it in a decentralized way. Right now, it's a service that essentially the Pocket Foundation runs as a way to offer certain capabilities that are going to be added to version 1. So it's almost like we're testing things with the portal now that are going to be coming to the protocol. And then that's the ultimate goal. So there's not a way right now to like decentralize portals so anyone can spin one up, because it's a service right now that the foundation runs because it's being added to the actual protocol, which is what V1 is.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay. Beautiful. Next question.
More of a comment, but you were talking, Jinx, earlier about different architectures and way that people are, deploying nodes differently. One thing that we're actually experimenting with Node Pilot, and we're actually developing right now, is the ability to run Node Pilot inside Docker. So it's Docker deployed inside Docker, so that independent nodes can actually be deployed without any firewall, because the Ubuntu firewall, like the Ubuntu server, basically the host firewall itself, can act as a firewall, which is very important for Harmony nodes that are spamming. I don't know if most people have noticed this or not, but Harmony nodes, they'll spam the local network for some reason. I don't even know why, but with certain hosting providers, you'll start getting warnings about spamming their network, because you're basically spamming their internal network. And it's just pings. It's just like pinging to see who's around. And I don't think anyone's gotten down to the reason that they do that, why a Harmony node needs to ping every address it can think of. But at least right now, it's been creating a big problem with people that are self-deploying. And so at least we're experimenting with another kind of architecture where it's Docker inside Docker. So you actually have another firewall layer to protect against Harmony nodes from pinging the rest of a network. But then on top of that, opening the door for there to be other deployment options where maybe they don't have a dedicated firewall, but could still have protection through as much as the Ubuntu server firewall can provide, which is more than enough for enterprise use cases.
So you've yo-dogged the container.
Yes, it's a Docker network inside of a Docker network. So it's Docker and Docker. So it's Docker inception. Dockerception is what we're basically getting into at this point.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, and so that will help reduce some of the network impact while still performing at the same level. You don't see any potential like degradation of speed in regard to that?
Nope, no, we haven't. Because of how Docker's actually designed, it's still using. You can basically have as many layers of Docker as you want per se, but it doesn't actually. It's not virtualizing any resources, so you still get the same level of resources that you get from, native Docker, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. Is that something that is only in Node Pilot right now, or is that something that's possible for everyone who's running nodes?
It's very complex, and so at least on our side, it's it's not necessarily something that can just be just done. Um, but also Node Pilot's trying to create automation in a way where where it just, at least with us, we can design it in such a way that even though it's relatively complex, it can still be automated. So users wouldn't actually experience anything different in terms of them running nodes and deploying nodes and everything like that. But just in the background, there's more security and protection and firewall because of it being inside of Docker inside Docker. But I don't really know. I know that I think some of this might apply to Node Launcher, or might be usable with inside Node Launcher, which is our open source deployment engine. Not sure on that yet, but at least for right now, it just takes a very specific configuration that, depending on how you're trying to structure your nodes, uh, yeah, it's very specific. It's actually, there's not a whole lot of documentation, like as much documentation on this kind of infrastructure setup where you're using Docker inside Docker, and so it's taken quite a bit of exploration on our side. But it looks like the result is going to be pretty cool.
Interesting. I wonder if I mean, is it a 1-to-1 ratio, one Docker container inside the parent container, or is it possible to have like a pre-configured array of Docker containers contained within that parent container?
Well, it's not quite so easy it doesn't lay out quite like that. But right now, like if someone were to install NodePilot right now, it's an executable that then deploys Docker containers as you deploy new nodes, right? Well, what we've done is we've essentially containerized then um, Node Pilot itself, so it's no longer an executable; it's actually its own container, and then that own container deploys its own containers. But if you look at Docker, Docker just sees all the containers as just regular containers, but on the more like on the network side, it's all structured as this is a sub network of this container, of this node pilot instance basically. So all these other containers, even though you could just do Docker ps and you could see all the containers, they're actually they're actually getting their file system and their networking and things of that nature from a Docker, from basically Docker, uh, the Docker assigned to inside of that Node Pilot container instance. I'm butchering it. I'm probably butchering it. There might be people having heart attacks over this explanation, but at least my non ones and zeros dev mind can wrap around it. That's essentially what it's doing. So you wouldn't really see the Dockerception happening of like you just do Docker PS and you only see one container and then you go in that container and then you see a whole bunch of containers. It's actually structured where it would look almost the exact same, except it's pulling. It basically there's like a container that's almost the dependency of the other containers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. Huh. Okay. Well, be interested in hearing more about that in the future as that develops. One of the other things, just as a quick side note here, I mentioned earlier a lot of the best tooling around Pocket has come from people in the community itself open sourcing. Um, there are a few things that are still sort of held tightly by some of the larger providers that I know a lot of the smaller providers would love to have. So if anyone out there has a good working auto sweep and or auto unjail script that they'd like to open source, the community would appreciate the hell out of you for that. Next question.
Hello, guys.
Yep.
Any words about the WAGMI proposal?
The WAGMI proposal, it's currently in voting right now. So far, from the looks of it, it's all the votes are in favor, so I expect both PUP 11 and PUP 13 will likely pass.
Okay.
Any questions about the execution or implementation of that proposal? No? Okay, cool.
Yeah, one question about the implementation.
Sure.
The 10% sort of peel back, is that something that's just going to be done I guess it said something about a month. Every month you're going to peel back 10% of rewards. Maybe I'm translating this incorrectly, but it said 10% of rewards get peeled back every month, and then it's going to reach a certain point, whatever that point is, and then it just stops and it's going to stay at that new point, or does it get reset when relays get to a certain level? Like how does that all work between the
Sure.
relays and the peel back of those rewards on a monthly basis?
So I don't think Adam's on the call, so I'll deign to speak for him. There are two proposals, right? PUP 11 is a proposal which authorizes the DAO to take a more active hand in managing the pocket per relay multiplier in the protocol parameters in order to adjust inflation dynamically. Now, that does not give an open hand to just adjust it at any point in time. It does require DAO proposals to be, written up, voted on, and passed in order to make changes in the future. PUP 13 is the first implementation or initial parameters which would be used for the drawdown of rewards at that time. This is a responsive to relay volume. So for example, the in pup 13 there's a final target that's being looked at over the course of about 6 months in drawdown. If the relays from new chains coming on and new dApps being staked are tripling or so in that time, the net effect of that at the end of the drawdown is going to be daily rewards that are not terribly different than they are right now. And that's part of the equation in WAGMI, that there is an ability to respond to volume of relays in there. Now, it would be a little bit crazy, I think, to have something that was truly dynamic, that was responding to relays in real time. That would probably involve significant logic and come with a lot of peril. But having some adjustable targets that the DAO is able to, propose and vote on gives better than Fed level inflation controls when it comes to making sure that the market is sustainable and that the project itself is sustainable over the long term. The goal with this current drawdown is to allow triple to quadruple the current relay volume without tripling to quadrupling the current pocket minting, which would essentially flood the marketplace and act as a natural down force on the value of the token. The flip side of that, something that Jack mentioned recently, is the DAO also has the ability to increase minting should relays drop for any reason. If we started to see a significant fall off in staked nodes, for instance, to the point where it was threatening network throughput, the DAO could also put up a proposal to increase pocket per relay minted to make the reward side of the equation a lot more attractive. So, I mean, from an implementation perspective, I think over the next 6 months we'll see how relays grow in relation to the reduction in rewards that are coming down. I think 10% a month is a very strong starting parameter on that, because the idea obviously would be that the biz dev team is shout out Eric, I see you're on the call, is increasing the relays by an equivalent amount, or at least is targeting that, and that we would see relays or rewards stay fairly stable through a growth period of the network. If we don't see that, obviously that's something that the DAO, and myself included as a governor in the DAO, would have to evaluate from an economics perspective and decide what the step forward is from there.
Any ETA for implementation?
I believe that upon passing, like the first step in that would be pushing a version update that allows for the initial change. So it would probably get rolled into the next version that gets pushed out. That's purely speaking from seat of my pants there. We'd probably need somebody on the protocol team to clarify exactly when that would go into play. But according to the DAO proposal, it would be immediate from a when can it be pushed into a software update perspective. I don't know the normal timeline on pushing versions, so that that could be a week, 2 weeks, 30 days. If somebody here can speak to that, that'd be great.
Well, actually, I don't believe there's any version, or maybe I missed something, but I don't believe there's any version push that is required, because it's just a parameter that already exists. And so I believe essentially the DAO is giving or is setting um, a clock for the and an amount for the you know whoever's got the keys at the foundation for that specific or who can submit that specific call. So I don't believe it only requires a transaction on the blockchain, if I'm not mistaken. That was my understanding, because the rewards is set as a parameter, which could just be simply changed with the right authorization.
Got it. That makes sense. I thought the version update would have to go out to actually include that and push that out across the network. But you're saying that it could essentially just be pushed from a controlling node, essentially?
Yeah, it's whoever. Yeah, like the foundation has uh, the foundation directors, right? I believe are the ones that have access to have the authority to essentially submit a transaction and sign it, and it will be adopted by the network, right? So that's what the proposal is essentially allowing is hey, as a DAO, let's make this our our target goal, and when we want this parameter to be changed, and then that authorizes the foundation to enact those wishes.
Okay, got it. So then it would just be a
Just
matter
one
of
transaction.
now.
Yeah, just one transaction.
Okay, cool. Well, there we go. Faster and easier than I thought.
Okay, thanks.
You got it. And I think we got time for maybe one last question here. It's now or never. Well, at least till next week. Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, then we'll call that a wrap for this week's office hours call. I will be creating the next week's event right after that. So hang tight in the Node Runners channel, and I'll have a link up for y'all to RSVP to shortly.
Wait. We got one coming through on. Never mind. Sorry, it disappeared on Twitter.
Well, it's if it got it in, I would have been here for him. But I do appreciate everyone coming to these calls and contributing your knowledge and asking your questions as well. Everybody in the community is part of this, and we want to make sure that these office hours calls stay available so that you always have access to a number of other node runners and also folks on the Core Pocket team. So thanks for coming. Keep an eye out for the invite for the next one, and we'll see you soon.